At 72, I thought I knew my daughter Sarah well enough to trust her with anything. Every morning started the same way for me. A cup of black coffee, my blood pressure pills, and checking the news on my old tablet before looking at my bank account. It was a routine that gave me comfort, knowing exactly where I stood financially after decades of careful saving. That Tuesday morning felt different the moment I opened my banking app. The number staring back at me made no sense. Where my savings account should have shown $287,542, money I'd saved from 35 years working as a school secretary, every holiday bonus, every tax refund carefully tucked away, there was nothing. Actually worse than nothing. The account showed negative $89. My hand started shaking as I refreshed the page, thinking maybe the app was broken. But the numbers stayed the same. I scrolled down to see the transaction history, and there it was, one massive withdrawal dated 4 days ago. Every penny gone in a single transfer. I called the bank immediately, my voice trembling as I explained to the customer service representative that there had to be some mistake. After being transferred twice, a woman named Jennifer told me something that made my stomach drop. The withdrawal had been authorized by someone with access to my joint account. "Ma'am, I see here that your daughter Sarah Mitchell authorized this transfer on Friday afternoon," Jennifer said gently. "She has full access as a joint account holder." The phone almost slipped from my hands. Sarah was the only other person on that account. I'd added her years ago when I was worried about what would happen if I ever got sick and needed someone to help with my finances. I never imagined she would take everything without even telling me. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the yellow roses in the vase Sarah had brought me last month. She'd seemed normal then, laughing about her new apartment, complaining about her job at the marketing firm. Not once had she mentioned needing money. When I finally got the courage to call her, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back about something important, trying to keep my voice steady. Hours passed. I called again. Still voicemail. It wasn't until that evening that Sarah finally called me back. I asked her directly why she'd taken my money, and her response shocked me more than seeing the empty account. "Mom, relax. I saw an investment opportunity that was too good to pass up," she said, like she was talking about borrowing a cup of sugar. "You weren't doing anything with that money anyway. It was just sitting there." I told her that money was for my future, for home repairs, medical expenses, maybe moving to a senior community someday. I'd been planning to replace my roof before winter, and I needed new glasses since my prescription had changed. Sarah actually laughed. "Mom, you live like you're broke. You never spend money on anything fun. At least now it's working for us instead of just collecting dust." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That wasn't your decision to make, Sarah." "Well, technically it was a joint account," she said coolly. "Look, I'm busy right now. We can talk about this later." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, realizing I wasn't talking to the daughter who used to bring me homemade cookies and stay for dinner every Sunday. This was someone who saw me as a bank account with legs. That night, I counted my remaining pills. I had 8 days of heart medication left, maybe 10 if I cut them in half. My arthritis medication was down to 5 pills. Without my savings, I had no way to refill the prescriptions when they ran out. I opened my purse and counted the cash. I had $127 from my Social Security check, plus about $30 in loose bills. My rent was due in a week. The prescriptions would cost at least $200 even with Medicare. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed doing calculations, trying to figure out how to stretch everything. Maybe I could ask my neighbor Mrs. Chun if she needed any cleaning done. Maybe I could sell some of my furniture. The next morning, I decided to cut my pills in half to make them last longer. I went to the pharmacy anyway, hoping maybe there was some assistance program I didn't know about. The pharmacist, a young man named Kevin, checked my insurance and shook his head. "Your Medicare doesn't kick in for the deductible for another month," he said. "Without that, it's going to be $278 for both prescriptions." I thanked him and left empty-handed. On the walk home, I started feeling dizzy. The sidewalk seemed to tilt under my feet. I made it to the bus stop bench before my legs gave out completely. A woman jogging by stopped when she saw me. She was wearing scrubs and had kind eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked. I tried to say yes, but the words wouldn't come out right. Everything felt fuzzy around the edges. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance with an oxygen mask over my face. At the hospital, they stabilized me and asked about my medications. When I explained that I'd been cutting my pills in half because I couldn't afford refills, the nurse looked concerned. They kept me overnight for observation and gave me enough medication to last 3 days. "You have someone who can help you with this?" the discharge nurse asked. I nodded, even though it wasn't true. I couldn't bring myself to admit that my only family had stolen my life savings and disappeared. I took a taxi home with the hospital bracelet still on my wrist and a pamphlet about local food banks in my purse. The house felt different when I walked in, smaller, colder. All the family photos on the mantel looked like lies now. That afternoon I called Sarah one more time. When she finally answered, she sounded annoyed. "What now, Mom?" I swallowed my pride and told her about the hospital, about not being able to afford my medication. I explained that without the heart pills I could have another episode. There was silence on the other end. Then Sarah sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "Mom, I told you I don't have the money right now. Everything's tied up in this investment. You're going to have to figure something else out." "Sarah, I'm asking for help with medication that keeps me alive." "Look, your health problems aren't my responsibility," she said flatly. "You're an adult. You made your choices about how to live your life." I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone like it had burned me. The daughter I'd raised alone after her father left, the girl I'd worked double shifts to put through college, had just told me my health wasn't her problem. I hung up without saying goodbye. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was my wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned. I'd kept it all these years, even after the divorce, because it reminded me of a time when someone promised to take care of me. I slipped it off my finger and wrapped it in tissue paper. Then I went to the closet and pulled out my mother's sewing machine, the one I'd used to make Sarah's Halloween costumes when she was little. The pawn shop on Main Street smelled like old cigarettes and desperation. The man behind the counter barely looked at me as he examined my ring through a magnifying glass. "I can give you $60, he said. The sewing machine got me another $40. $100 total for items that held decades of memories. On the way to the pharmacy, something changed inside me. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started feeling something else, something harder and colder. Sarah thought she could take everything from me and walk away. She thought I'd just disappear quietly, maybe even die quietly, and she'd inherit whatever was left. But as I stood in that pharmacy, finally able to buy my medication with pawn shop money, I realized something important. I wasn't dead yet. And if Sarah wanted to treat me like I was already gone, maybe it was time to start planning like I was, but not the way she expected. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept my important papers and pulled out my will. It was dated 2018, back when I still believed Sarah would take care of me when I got old. The document named her as my sole beneficiary, inheriting my house, my small life insurance policy, everything. I stared at that paper and felt nothing but disgust. Not at Sarah, but at myself for being so naive. For trusting someone who could look me in the eye and say my health wasn't her problem. I folded the will and put it back in the drawer. But this time I made a mental note. This wasn't how my story was going to end. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of shock and hurt had lifted, replaced by something sharper and more focused. I wasn't going to spend my remaining years waiting for Sarah to develop a conscience that clearly didn't exist. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt determined. Sarah had made a choice when she stole my money. Now it was time for me to make mine. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a gentle knock at my door. It was Mrs. Chun from next door, holding a covered dish that smelled like heaven. "I made too much chicken and rice," she said with a smile, though we both knew she was checking on me. "Would you like some?" Margaret Chun had been my neighbor for 8 years. She was a retired teacher about my age. With silver hair she kept in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. Unlike my own daughter, Margaret had noticed when I stopped tending my garden and started looking thinner. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" I said as she set the dish on my counter. "Do you know any lawyers?" Her eyebrows went up slightly. "What kind of lawyer?" I told her everything. About Sarah draining my account, about the hospital, about being told my health wasn't her problem. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need someone who specializes in elder law. I know just the person." Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "There's a woman named Patricia Rodriguez who helped my sister when her son was trying to pressure her into signing over her house. Patricia doesn't mess around." Within an hour, Margaret had made the call and arranged an appointment for that afternoon. "I'm driving you," she said when I protested about the cost of a taxi. "This is important." Patricia Rodriguez's office was in a converted house downtown, with plants in every window and comfortable chairs that didn't feel intimidating. Patricia herself was probably in her 50s, with kind but sharp eyes and the sort of no-nonsense handshake that told you she'd seen it all before. "Tell me what happened," she said simply. I went through the story again, feeling less embarrassed this time. Patricia took notes and asked specific questions about the joint account, about Sarah's access, about my current financial situation. "Here's the thing," Patricia said when I finished. "What your daughter did was technically legal since she was on the account. But that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean you're powerless." She explained that I could remove Sarah from any remaining accounts immediately. More importantly, I could change my will and set up protections to make sure Sarah couldn't manipulate me again. "I want to create what we call a revocable living trust," Patricia said. "It'll protect your assets and give you complete control over who gets what when you're gone. We can also set up a power of attorney with someone you actually trust." I glanced at Margaret, who had insisted on coming with me for moral support. She nodded encouragingly. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "If you want to document what happened, we can create a video statement. Sometimes families try to challenge these things later, claiming the person wasn't in their right mind. A clear video statement prevents that." The whole process took 3 hours. We went through every detail of my finances, my property, my wishes. I named Margaret as my power of attorney and the executor of my new will. More importantly, I removed Sarah entirely. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked as we prepared to sign the final documents. "This is a big step." I thought about Sarah's laugh when I told her I needed money for my roof. I thought about her saying my health wasn't her problem. "I'm sure." The most powerful moment came when Patricia set up the video camera. I sat in front of it and spoke directly to the lens, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Helen Morrison, and I am 72 years old. I am of sound mind and body, and I am making this statement of my own free will. My daughter Sarah Mitchell stole my life savings without my knowledge or permission. When I asked for help obtaining life-saving medication, she told me my health was not her problem. I am changing my will to reflect these actions. Everything I own will go to Margaret Chun, who has shown me more kindness and care than my own daughter ever did." When we finished recording, Patricia smiled. That was perfect. Clear, specific, and completely unambiguous. On the drive home, Margaret was quiet until we pulled into my driveway. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "I hope so. It doesn't feel good, cutting off your own child. Helen, she cut herself off when she stole from you. You're just making it official." That evening, I called my bank and had Sarah removed from my checking account. The customer service representative asked if I was sure, since joint accounts were often used for family assistance. "I'm very sure," I said. Next, I went through my house with new eyes. Everything looked different now that I knew where it was really going. The antique dining set my grandmother had left me, the china cabinet full of dishes I'd collected over the years, even my small collection of first edition books, none of it would go to Sarah. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But I also felt something else brewing inside me. Anger, yes, but also a desire for Sarah to understand the consequences of her choices. She thought she could take my money and disappear until I died quietly and left her the house. She had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks passed peacefully. I started eating Margaret's cooking regularly, and she helped me set up online banking, so I could monitor my accounts more carefully. I was feeling stronger both physically and emotionally. Then Sarah showed up. I heard her car in the driveway on a Thursday afternoon, that same rattling Honda she'd been driving since college. Through the window, I watched her get out carrying a small suitcase and wearing the same fake smile she'd used to charm her way out of trouble as a teenager. She knocked on the door like nothing had happened. "Hi, Mom," she said when I opened it. "I wanted to surprise you." I didn't smile back. "What do you want, Sarah? Can't a daughter visit her mother?" She pushed past me into the living room and set down her suitcase. I missed you. I watched her look around the house, and I could practically see her calculating the value of everything in sight. She had no idea that none of it belonged to her anymore. How long are you planning to stay? I asked. Just a few days. My apartment lease is up, and I'm between places right now. She flopped onto my couch like she owned it. I figured we could spend some time together. Between places. That was Sarah's way of saying she'd been evicted or couldn't afford rent. I wondered how her investment opportunity was working out. Where's my money, Sarah? Her smile faltered for just a moment. Mom, we've been through this. The investment is long-term. I can't just pull it out without losing everything. So you lost my life savings. I didn't lose anything. It's just tied up right now. She stood and walked to the kitchen, opening my refrigerator like she lived there. Do you have anything to eat? I'm starving. I watched her make herself a sandwich with ingredients Margaret had brought me, and something cold settled in my chest. Sarah wasn't here because she missed me. She was here because she'd run out of other options and needed a place to crash. You can stay 3 days, I said. Then you need to find somewhere else. 3 days. Sarah looked genuinely surprised. Mom, I'm your daughter. I remember. You're the daughter who told me my health wasn't your problem. That night, while Sarah slept in my spare room, I sat in my kitchen and planned. She thought she was playing me, coming back with her fake affection and helpless act. But I had news for her. I pulled out a small recording device Margaret had helped me buy. Just a simple digital recorder that could fit in my pocket. If Sarah was going to try to manipulate me again, I wanted everything documented. I also moved my important papers to Margaret's house for safekeeping. The new will, the trust documents, the video testimony, all of it safe where Sarah couldn't find it. Because something told me my daughter wasn't just here for a place to stay. She was here for something bigger. And this time I was going to be ready for her. The next morning, I woke up to find Sarah going through my mail at the kitchen table. She looked up innocently when she saw me. I was just organizing things for you, Mom. Your bills are getting a little scattered. She'd opened everything, including bank statements and insurance documents. I could see her brain working, trying to figure out my financial situation. Thank you, I said sweetly, but I can handle my own mail. Sarah spent the next 2 days being the perfect daughter. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, even watched my old movies with me. But I noticed her watching me too, studying my routines, asking casual questions about my health, my finances, my plans. On her last night, she made her move. Mom, I've been thinking, she said as we sat in the living room after dinner. You're getting older, and living alone isn't safe. What if you fell and couldn't get help? I kept my expression neutral. I manage fine. But wouldn't it be smart to have someone checking on you regularly? Maybe someone who could help with your bills and medical appointments. There it was. Sarah wanted back into my financial life. What are you suggesting? Well, maybe I could move back in for a while. Help take care of things. She reached over and patted my hand. I feel terrible about our misunderstanding before. I want to make it up to you. Misunderstanding. That's what she called stealing my life savings. I'll think about it, I said. Sarah smiled, believing she'd won. She had no idea that every word of this conversation was being recorded, or that her misunderstanding had already cost her everything she thought she was entitled to. After she left the next morning, promising to call soon about moving back in, I sat in my quiet house and smiled. Sarah thought she was so clever, coming back to rebuild trust so she could rob me again. But I had something she didn't know about. I had time, patience, and a plan. And unlike my daughter, I'd learned that the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of watching someone dig their own grave. 3 weeks went by without a word from Sarah, and I began to think maybe she'd found another target for her schemes. I was wrong. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I heard that familiar car door slam in my driveway, followed by the sound of multiple trips back and forth. When I looked out the window, Sarah was unloading boxes and suitcases like she was moving in permanently. She didn't knock this time, just used the spare key I'd forgotten she had. Surprise! She called out as she dragged a large duffel bag through my front door. I decided to take you up on your offer. What offer? About me moving in to help take care of you. She said it like we'd already agreed, like it was a done deal. My lease was up anyway, and this works out perfectly for both of us. I stood there watching her claim my space, and I felt that familiar cold anger settling in my chest. But this time I was prepared. I suppose you can stay for a while, I said carefully. Sarah's face lit up with what she probably thought was convincing relief. Thank you so much, Mom. I promise I'll be a huge help around here. Over the next few days, I watched Sarah's true behavior reveal itself. She left dishes in the sink, used my car without asking, and made long phone calls behind closed doors. But more telling was how she started poking around my personal business. I caught her going through my desk drawers while I was supposedly napping. She was careful, putting everything back exactly where she found it, but I'd marked the positions of certain papers. When I came back, they'd been moved. The small recording device Margaret had helped me buy became my constant companion. I kept it in my cardigan pocket, always ready. Sarah had no idea that her every conversation, every suspicious move, was being documented. On Thursday evening, Sarah made her first real attempt at manipulation. Mom, I've been looking at your bills, she said, settling onto the couch next to me with a folder of my financial papers. Some of these seem really complicated. Wouldn't it be easier if I helped manage things? I manage fine on my own. I know, but what if something happened to you? What if you got confused or had another medical emergency? She put on her most concerned expression. Maybe we should set up that joint account again just for emergencies. There it was. Sarah wanted access to my money again. I'll consider it, I said, while the recorder in my pocket captured every word. The next day, while Sarah was out job hunting, which I suspected meant looking for her next mark, I visited Margaret. She's moving fast, Margaret said as she listened to the recorded conversation. She's not even trying to be subtle about it. She thinks I'm the same confused old woman she stole from before, I said. She has no idea what's coming. Margaret and I had been busy during Sarah's absence. We'd contacted a local elder advocacy group that Patricia had recommended. They specialized in financial abuse cases and had connections with investigative journalists who exposed these kinds of family scams. Are you ready to go public with this? Margaret asked. Once this story gets out, there's no taking it back. I thought about Sarah rifling through my papers, about her fake concern, about the word misunderstanding she'd used to describe theft. I'm ready. That afternoon, I met with a reporter named Jessica Martinez who specialized in elder abuse stories. She was younger than Sarah, with sharp eyes and a gentle way of asking hard questions. Walk me through everything, Jessica said, setting up a small recording device between us. I told the whole story again, the stolen money, the hospital stay, Sarah's callous response, and now her return with plans to steal again. Jessica listened intently, taking notes. Do you have documentation? I showed her the bank records, the recordings of Sarah's recent conversations, and photos of her going through my personal papers that Margaret had helped me take with a hidden camera. This is solid, Jessica said. But I have to ask, are you prepared for the fallout? Stories like this can go viral. Your daughter might face serious consequences. What consequences did I face when she left me unable to afford my heart medication? I asked. She made her choices. Now she can live with the results. Jessica's article came out online 3 days later with the headline, Daughter Steals Elderly Mother's Life Savings, Returns to Steal More. She'd changed our names, but anyone who knew us would recognize the story. The article included excerpts from my recordings and a photo of Sarah's fake concerned expression when she'd asked about managing my bills. Jessica had done her research, finding court records showing Sarah had been evicted from 3 apartments in 2 years and had outstanding debts with several creditors. I didn't tell Sarah about the article. I wanted to see how long it would take her to find out. Took less than 12 hours. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard Sarah's voice from the living room, loud and panicked. What the hell is this? She yelled. I walked in to find her staring at her phone, her face pale with rage. What's wrong, dear? This article. Someone wrote an article about us. She thrust her phone at me. Look at this. I pretended to read it for the first time, making appropriate shocked noises. Oh my. How terrible. Terrible? Mom, this makes me look like a criminal. Well, you did steal my money. Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. I didn't steal anything. I used money from a joint account for an investment opportunity. And now some reporter is ruining my reputation. The article had already been shared hundreds of times on social media. The comments section was filled with people expressing outrage at Sarah's behavior and sympathy for me. "This is going to ruin me," Sarah said, pacing around my living room. "I'll never get another job. People are going to recognize me. Maybe you should have thought about that before you told me my health wasn't your problem." Sarah spun around to stare at me. For the first time, she seemed to realize that I wasn't the same helpless woman she'd left in the hospital. "You did this," she said slowly. "You talked to a reporter." I told the truth. "You vindictive old..." Sarah caught herself, but I could see the real anger now, the rage that she'd been hiding behind fake smiles and concerned daughter acts. "I think you should pack your things," I said calmly. "You can't kick me out. I live here now. Actually, I can. This is my house, and you're not on the lease or the deed. You have no legal right to be here." Sarah stood there sputtering, probably trying to figure out how her careful manipulation had gone so wrong. She'd come back expecting to find the same broken woman she'd left behind. Instead, she'd walked into a trap. Over the next hour, I listened to Sarah make frantic phone calls. She called friends, former coworkers, even distant relatives looking for somewhere to stay. But the article had already spread to her social media networks. People who knew her were seeing exactly what kind of person she really was. "Nobody will take me in," she said finally, slumping on my couch. "Everyone's seen that stupid article. That's unfortunate. Mom, please. Can't we work this out? I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. You stopped being my daughter when you told me my health wasn't your problem." Sarah tried tears next, then anger, then bargaining. She promised to pay back the money she'd stolen, even though we both knew she didn't have it. She swore she'd changed, that she understood how much she'd hurt me. But I'd heard it all before. The recording device in my pocket captured every false promise, every manipulation attempt, every moment when her mask slipped and showed the selfishness underneath. By evening, Sarah was gone. She left with her boxes and suitcases, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits, but we both knew she had no legal ground to stand on. After her car disappeared down the street, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Margaret came over later with a bottle of wine to celebrate. "How do you feel?" she asked as we sat in my living room. "Lighter," I said. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally put it down." The article continued to gain traction online. Jessica contacted me a few days later to say it had been picked up by several major news outlets. Apparently, stories about family financial abuse were becoming more common, and mine had struck a nerve. "People are sharing their own stories in the comments," Jessica told me. "Your courage to speak out is helping other people realize they're not alone." I hadn't thought about it that way. I just wanted Sarah to face consequences for her actions. But knowing that my story might help other people made it feel even more worthwhile. Sarah tried calling a few times over the next week, but I didn't answer. She left voicemails that started angry and gradually became more desperate. In the last one, she was crying. "Mom, please talk to me. I'm sleeping in my car. I know I messed up, but I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything?" I deleted it without responding. Some people might think I was being too harsh. But those people hadn't pawned their wedding rings to afford heart medication while their child laughed about taking their life savings. They hadn't been told their health wasn't their child's problem. Sarah had made her choices. Now she was learning that choices have consequences. And I was finally learning what it felt like to choose myself first. The story wasn't over yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was the one writing it instead of just surviving it. The weeks following Sarah's departure passed quietly, but I knew it wasn't over. People like Sarah don't just disappear when their first plan fails. They regroup and try again. I was right. It started with the letters. At first, they came to my house, handwritten notes from Sarah claiming she was homeless, hungry, and desperate. The letters were carefully crafted to pull at my heartstrings, full of apologies and promises to change. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. When the letters to my house stopped working, Sarah got creative. She started sending them to my neighbors, to Margaret, even to the grocery store I frequented. The letters painted me as a cruel mother who had abandoned her daughter over a simple financial misunderstanding. Margaret brought me one that had been left on her doorstep. She's trying to turn people against you, Margaret said as I read Sarah's dramatic account of how I'd publicly humiliated her and left her with nothing. Let her try, I said. Anyone who believes her version doesn't know the real story. But Sarah's campaign was more persistent than I'd expected. She started showing up places where she knew I'd be: the pharmacy, the bank, the small cafe where Margaret and I had lunch every Tuesday. She never approached me directly, but she made sure I saw her. She looked thin and disheveled, clearly playing up her victim status for anyone watching. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when I was leaving the grocery store. Sarah was waiting by my car, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please," she said loudly enough for other shoppers to hear. "I just need to talk to you. I'm your daughter." Several people stopped to watch, probably wondering what kind of mother would ignore a crying young woman. I could see Sarah calculating their reactions, feeding off their sympathy. "You made your choice," I said quietly, unlocking my car. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes." Sarah's voice got louder, more dramatic. "I'm sleeping in shelters because my own mother won't forgive me." An older man nearby frowned at me disapprovingly. A woman with a shopping cart shook her head. Sarah was playing her audience perfectly. "I forgave you the first time you stole from me," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the parking lot. "I forgave you when you laughed at me for needing money for my medication. I forgave you when you told me my health wasn't your problem. What I won't forgive is you thinking I'm stupid enough to fall for this act." I got in my car and drove away, leaving Sarah with her audience of strangers who now looked confused rather than sympathetic. That evening, Margaret came over with tea and concern. "She's not going to stop," Margaret said. "People like Sarah don't know when to quit." "I know, but I'm not the same person she's dealing with anymore." Margaret smiled. "No, you're not. You're stronger than I've ever seen you." She was right. The woman who had pawned her wedding ring to buy heart medication was gone. In her place was someone who had learned to choose herself first, to set boundaries, to refuse to be manipulated by guilt or family obligation. But I also knew Sarah well enough to predict her next move. She was going to try one final desperate play. It came 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning when I was getting ready for church. Margaret and I had planned to attend together, then have lunch at our favorite cafe. It was becoming our weekly routine, and I looked forward to these peaceful Sundays. I was putting on my earrings when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Sarah getting out of an unfamiliar car, probably borrowed from whatever friend she'd convinced to help her this time. But Sarah wasn't alone. With her was a man I'd never seen before, someone in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. They knocked on my door with authority, the kind of knock that demanded attention. "Helen Morrison?" the man said when I opened the door. "I'm David Walsh, attorney for Sarah Mitchell. I represent your daughter in a matter concerning elder abuse and financial manipulation." I almost laughed. Sarah had actually found a lawyer willing to claim I was abusing her. "We need to discuss your recent actions against my client," Walsh continued. "The public humiliation, the financial cutoff, the refusal to provide basic family support. These could constitute elder manipulation in reverse." "Is that even a real thing?" I asked. "We believe we can make a case for it," Walsh said smoothly. "However, my client is willing to resolve this matter quietly if you're reasonable." Sarah stood behind him, no longer crying or playing victim. She looked cold and calculating, like she thought she'd finally found a way to win. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Full reinstatement in your will and financial accounts," Walsh said. "A public apology for the defamatory article, and compensation for the damages to my client's reputation." I stared at them both for a long moment. Sarah actually thought this would work. She thought I'd be intimidated by a lawyer and a handful of legal threats. "Mr. Walsh," I said finally, "I think you should know that your client stole nearly $300,000 from my savings account. When I couldn't afford my heart medication as a result, she told me my health wasn't her problem. Do you really want to take this case to court?" Walsh's confidence flickered slightly. "My client has explained that situation. It was a misunderstanding about joint account access." "Do you have documentation of this misunderstanding?" I asked. "We have bank records showing authorized withdrawals from a joint account." I have recordings of your client admitting she took the money for an investment opportunity. I have recordings of her refusing to help when I couldn't afford medication. I have video testimony explaining exactly why I changed my will. Would you like to hear them? Walsh glanced at Sarah, who was starting to look less confident. We also have witnesses to your client's recent harassment campaign, I continued. Her attempts to manipulate neighbors and strangers into pressuring me. Her dramatic performances in public places. Should I go on? This isn't over, Sarah said suddenly, her mask slipping again. You can't just cut me out. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter, I said. Now you're just someone who used to live in my house. Walsh was already backing away, clearly realizing he'd been fed a one-sided story. Ms. Mitchell, I think we need to discuss your case further. They left without another word. I watched them drive away, Sarah gesturing angrily at Walsh, probably trying to convince him that I was lying. 20 minutes later, Margaret arrived to pick me up for church. You look peaceful, she said as I got in her car. I feel peaceful. I think that was Sarah's last attempt. What happened? I told her about the lawyer visit as we drove to church. Margaret shook her head in amazement. She actually thought she could intimidate you with legal threats? She still sees me as the woman who used to let her get away with everything. She can't accept that person doesn't exist anymore. At church, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not the kind people talk about in sermons, the automatic, expected forgiveness that lets people continue hurting you. But the real kind, the kind that protects your peace by accepting what is and choosing to move forward. I had forgiven Sarah in my own way. I'd forgiven her for being someone who could steal from her mother and feel no shame. I'd forgiven her for caring more about money than family. I'd forgiven her for being exactly who she'd always been underneath the daughter I thought I knew. But forgiveness didn't mean she got access to my life again. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending her actions hadn't revealed her true character. Forgiveness meant accepting the truth and choosing peace over the chaos she brought. After church, Margaret and I had lunch at our cafe. As we sat by the window watching people walk by, Margaret asked me something that had been on my mind too. Do you ever wonder if you did the right thing? Cutting her off completely. I thought about it while I sipped my coffee. I wonder if there was another way sometimes. But then I remember that night in the hospital, counting my pills and knowing I might not be able to afford the next refill. I remember her voice when she said my health wasn't her problem. And I know I made the only choice that protected my dignity. She might come back again, Margaret warned. Maybe. But each time she does, she proves I was right to protect myself. We finished lunch and drove home through the quiet Sunday streets. When Margaret dropped me off at my house, I stood in my driveway for a moment, looking at the place that had been my home for over 20 years. Felt different now. Lighter. Like a house that belonged to someone who had learned to value herself. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, and opened the small notebook where I'd been writing down my thoughts through this whole experience. I wanted to remember not just what had happened, but how it had felt to finally stand up for myself. I wrote, Today I realized that losing Sarah wasn't the tragedy I thought it would be. The tragedy would have been continuing to let her treat me like I didn't matter. The tragedy would have been dying someday knowing I'd never found the courage to choose myself first. I closed the notebook and looked around my peaceful house. Tomorrow Margaret and I were planning to visit a museum in the next town. Next week we were thinking about taking a day trip to the coast. Small adventures, but they felt significant because they were mine to choose. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow instead of just surviving today. The phone rang once that evening, probably Sarah making one last attempt. I didn't answer. Whatever she had to say, I'd already heard enough. Instead, I sat in my quiet house and planned the rest of my life. A life where my choices mattered, where my boundaries were respected, where I was surrounded by people who actually cared whether I lived or died. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when this all started. But it was better than anything I could have imagined back when I was pawning my wedding ring to survive. It was the ending I'd earned,